The sound of rain hammering against the courthouse steps echoed through the marble halls as Maya Sinclair clutched the manila envelope that would destroy everything she had ever believed about her family. Her designer heels clicked against the polished floor, each step taking her closer to a truth that would shatter the golden cage she had lived in for 28 years. Inside that envelope were bank records, forged documents, and photographs that proved her father, Richard Sinclair, wasn't the successful real estate mogul she had grown up admiring. He was a monster who had built their empire on the broken dreams and stolen life savings of hundreds of families. Maya's hands trembled as she remembered the moment 3 weeks earlier when she had accidentally discovered a hidden safe in her father's study, and how the contents had made her vomit right there on his Persian rug. The same rug where she used to play as a child while he worked late into the night on what she now knew were schemes to defraud elderly couples, desperate families, and struggling veterans of their homes and savings. It all started when Maya had returned to her childhood home in Connecticut to help her mother, Eleanor, plan her father's 60th birthday party. The Sinclair mansion sat on 15 acres of pristine landscape, complete with a tennis court, swimming pool, and a garage housing Richard's collection of luxury cars. Maya had grown up thinking they were blessed, that her father's hard work in real estate development had provided them with this lifestyle. She remembered how proud she felt introducing him to her college friends, how he would arrive at her school events in his Bentley, dressed in $1,000 suits, commanding respect wherever he went. Richard Sinclair was tall, silver-haired, and possessed the kind of confident charm that made people trust him instantly. He donated generously to charities, served on the hospital board, and was known throughout their community as a pillar of integrity. Maya had followed in his footsteps, earning her MBA and joining his company, Sinclair Holdings, where she worked as vice president of development, believing she was part of something meaningful and successful. The night that changed everything began innocently enough. Maya was in her father's study looking for his address book to send out party invitations when she accidentally knocked over his heavy desk lamp. As she bent down to pick it up, she noticed that one of the wooden floorboards beneath his desk had shifted. Curiosity getting the better of her, she pried it up and discovered a hidden compartment containing a small digital safe. Maya knew she should have walked away, but something about the secretive nature of the hiding place made her heart race with questions. She tried her mother's birthday, then her own, then various combinations until finally, almost as a joke, she entered the date of her parents' anniversary. The safe clicked open with a soft mechanical whir, revealing stacks of documents, USB drives, and photographs that would haunt her dreams forever. The first document she pulled out was a contract for a property development project called Golden Years Retirement Village, a project she remembered her father talking about with great enthusiasm just 2 years earlier. But as Maya read through the paperwork, her confusion grew into horror. The contract showed that Richard had taken deposits and down payments from over 200 seniors who wanted to buy units in the retirement community, collecting nearly $8 million in total. The plans looked legitimate, the marketing materials were professionally designed, and the location surveys seemed authentic. But stamped across the bottom of the final page was a single word that made Maya's blood run cold: cancelled. The project had been terminated 6 months after launch, but according to the bank records she found next, none of the deposits had been returned. Instead, the money had been funneled through a series of shell companies and ultimately deposited into accounts controlled by Richard Sinclair. As Maya dug deeper into the contents of the safe, she discovered that Golden Years was just one of dozens of similar schemes her father had operated over the past 15 years. There were fake investment opportunities promising guaranteed returns to middle-class families saving for their children's education. There were predatory loan schemes targeting veterans who needed quick cash to cover medical expenses. There were elaborate real estate flips where Richard would buy properties at low prices, convince elderly owners to sell by claiming their neighborhoods were becoming dangerous, then resell the properties at massive profits while the displaced families struggled to find new homes they could afford. Each scheme was documented in meticulous detail, as if Richard kept these records as trophies of his successful deceptions. But it was the photographs that broke Maya's heart completely. Hidden beneath all the financial documents were pictures of families, real people whose lives her father had destroyed. There was Margaret Henderson, an 82-year-old widow who had lost her home of 40 years because she couldn't keep up with the balloon payments on a loan Richard's company had convinced her to take. The photo showed her sitting on a park bench with 2 suitcases, everything she owned in the world beside her. There was the Ramirez family, parents and 3 young children, who had been evicted from their apartment after investing their savings in one of Richard's fake development projects. Maya recognized some of these faces. She had seen them in news articles over the years about foreclosures and investment scams, but she had never connected them to her father's business dealings. The most devastating discovery came when Maya found a letter written in her father's own handwriting, dated just 6 months earlier. In it, he outlined his plans for something called Operation Legacy, which involved targeting families who were struggling financially because of medical debt. The scheme was designed to offer these families consolidation loans that would supposedly help them manage their debt, but the fine print contained clauses that would allow Richard's company to seize their homes if they missed even a single payment. The letter revealed that Richard had already identified 43 families to target, and he estimated the scheme would generate over $12 million in profits. At the bottom of the letter, in his distinctive blue ink, Richard had written, "Maya will never have to worry about money. This will be my gift to her future." Maya spent the entire night in that study, reading document after document, her heart breaking a little more with each revelation. By dawn, she understood the full scope of her father's crimes. Over 15 years, Richard Sinclair had stolen an estimated $47 million from victims across 6 states. He had destroyed hundreds of families, caused dozens of divorces, and was responsible for at least 3 documented suicides among his victims, people who saw no way out of the financial ruin he had caused them. And the most sickening part was that Maya had been living off this blood money her entire adult life. Her college education, her car, her apartment in Manhattan, her designer clothes, everything had been paid for with money stolen from people who could barely afford to put food on their tables. When Richard came down for breakfast that morning, Maya was sitting at the kitchen table with some of the documents spread out in front of her. He walked in whistling, wearing his favorite golf shirt, and poured himself a cup of coffee before he noticed what she was looking at. The whistling stopped immediately. For a moment, father and daughter just stared at each other across the kitchen island, and Maya could see in his eyes that he knew his secret was out. "Maya, sweetheart, I can explain," he said, his voice taking on that same smooth, persuasive tone she had heard him use with business clients. "You have to understand, everything I did was for this family. For you and your mother. I wanted to make sure you never had to struggle the way I did when I was young." Maya felt rage building in her chest, a fury so pure and hot that it surprised her. "Struggle," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, you destroyed these people. Look at this woman, Margaret Henderson. She's living on the street because of you. This family, the Ramirez children, they're in foster care because their parents lost everything to one of your schemes. How dare you tell me this was for my benefit?" Richard moved around the island toward her, his hands raised in a calming gesture, but Maya stood up and backed away from him. "Don't you dare come near me," she said. "I've read everything, Dad. I know about all of it. The fake investments, the predatory loans, the retirement village scam. You're not a businessman, you're a criminal." Richard's expression shifted then, and for the first time in her life, Maya saw her father without his mask of charm and respectability. His face hardened, and his voice took on an edge she had never heard before. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Maya. Business is complicated. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions. Those people made choices to invest with us. No one forced them to sign contracts. If they were too stupid or too greedy to read the fine print, that's not my fault." Maya stared at him in disbelief. "Too stupid? Dad, these were elderly people who trusted you. Veterans who needed help. Families facing medical bankruptcies. You targeted the most vulnerable people you could find and you destroyed their lives for money." The argument that followed was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced with her father. Richard tried everything, first dismissing her concerns, then attempting to minimize the scope of his crimes, then finally trying to make her complicit by reminding her of everything his money had provided for her. "This house, your education, your lifestyle, all of it came from my work," he said. "You've been happy to benefit from my success for 28 years. Don't suddenly develop a conscience now." But Maya was no longer the naive daughter who had worshipped her successful father. "Your work," she said. "You mean your crimes. And I'm going to make sure every penny gets returned to the people you stole it from." That's when Richard made a threat that chilled Maya to her bones. "If you try to destroy me, you'll destroy your mother too," he said. "Eleanor doesn't know anything about this, but if these allegations become public, she'll lose everything. This house, her social standing, her health insurance, her entire identity is tied to being Mrs. Richard Sinclair. Are you really willing to ruin her life to play hero for a bunch of strangers?" Maya realized in that moment that her father wasn't just a financial criminal, he was a master manipulator who had no problem using emotional blackmail even against his own family. But she also realized that her mother deserved to know the truth about the man she had been married to for 32 years. Over the next week, Maya secretly copied every document from the hidden safe and began researching the legal implications of what she had discovered. She contacted a criminal defense attorney, not for her father, but to understand her own legal position and what she would need to do to properly report his crimes. She learned that in addition to fraud charges, Richard could face money laundering, tax evasion, and racketeering charges that could result in decades in prison. The attorney also told her something that made her decision easier: many of the statutes of limitations hadn't expired, which meant that victims could still get some form of justice, and potentially recover at least some of their stolen money. The hardest part was telling her mother. Maya chose a quiet afternoon when Richard was out of town on what he claimed was a business trip but which Maya now suspected was probably another scouting expedition for potential victims. She sat Eleanor down in the sunroom overlooking their perfectly manicured garden and slowly, gently, revealed the truth about how their beautiful life had been financed. Eleanor's reaction was not what Maya had expected. Instead of denial or shock, her mother became very quiet and very still. After Maya finished explaining everything, Eleanor was silent for nearly 10 minutes. Finally, she spoke. "I've suspected something for years," she said. "The way he would get phone calls late at night and leave the room to take them. The way he insisted on handling all our finances himself. The fact that we never socialized with his business partners or clients. I told myself I was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right." Eleanor's revelation that she had harbored suspicions for years actually made Maya's decision easier. Together, mother and daughter began planning how to expose Richard's crimes while protecting themselves legally and financially. Eleanor revealed that she had been quietly setting aside money in her own accounts for several years, partly because she wanted some financial independence, but also because she feared that Richard's secretiveness might eventually lead to problems. Maya was amazed to learn that her mother, who had always seemed so dependent on Richard, had actually been preparing for the possibility that their marriage might not survive whatever Richard was hiding. The moment of truth came on the evening of Richard's 60th birthday party. Maya and Eleanor had decided that they would confront him one final time, give him the opportunity to turn himself in and attempt to make restitution to his victims, and only go to the authorities if he refused. The party was held at the country club where Richard had been a member for 15 years. Nearly 200 guests attended, business associates, neighbors, friends from the tennis club, and members of the various charitable boards Richard served on. Maya watched her father work the room that night, charming everyone with his stories and his generous offers to help with various community projects, and she felt sick knowing that many of these well-meaning people had probably recommended Richard's services to friends and family who had become his victims. After the last guest left and they returned home, Maya and Eleanor sat Richard down in the living room and presented him with copies of all the evidence Maya had found. They explained that they knew the full scope of his crimes and that they wanted him to voluntarily surrender to authorities and begin the process of making restitution to his victims. Richard's response was to laugh, actually laugh, as if the idea of taking responsibility for his actions was absurd. "You two have no idea how the real world works," he said. Do you think I'm the only person in business who cuts corners? Do you think every millionaire in America got rich by playing fair? You're being incredibly naive. But then Richard made a tactical error that sealed his fate. Instead of trying to negotiate or show any remorse, he threatened Maya and Eleanor directly. If either of you goes to the police, I will make your lives hell, he said. I have connections in this town, in this state. I know judges, prosecutors, police chiefs. I'll destroy your reputations, tie you up in lawsuits for years, and make sure everyone knows that you were complicit in everything I did. Maya, you worked for my company. You signed documents. You can't expose me without incriminating yourself. Maya realized that her father had just confessed to having corrupt relationships with law enforcement officials, which was potentially another serious crime, and had also just threatened to retaliate against witnesses, which was definitely another serious crime. The next morning, Maya walked into the FBI field office in New Haven with 3 boxes of evidence and a written statement detailing everything she knew about her father's criminal enterprise. The special agent who interviewed her, Agent Sarah Chen, told Maya that they had actually been investigating reports of investment fraud in the region for over a year, but had been unable to identify the person or organization behind the schemes. Maya's evidence provided them with exactly what they needed to build a comprehensive case. Agent Chen also told Maya something that made her realize the full scope of what her father had done. They had identified at least 6 other states where similar schemes had been operating, suggesting that Richard's criminal enterprise was much larger than even Maya had discovered. Within 72 hours, federal agents raided the Sinclair mansion and Richard's offices. They seized computers, files, bank records, and over $2 million in cash that Richard had been keeping in various safe deposit boxes around the state. Richard was arrested at his office in front of his employees and several clients, ending forever his carefully constructed image as a respected businessman. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page with the headline, "Prominent Developer Charged in Multi-State Fraud Scheme," and within hours, Maya's phone was ringing constantly with calls from reporters wanting to know how she felt about her father's arrest. The trial lasted 6 weeks and was covered extensively by local and national media. Maya testified for 3 days, walking the jury through every document she had found and explaining how she had pieced together the scope of her father's crimes. The hardest part of her testimony came when the prosecutor asked her to read aloud from some of the victim impact statements that had been submitted to the court. Maya broke down in tears as she read Margaret Henderson's letter describing how losing her home had led to depression so severe that she had contemplated suicide. She sobbed as she read the statement from Maria Ramirez, explaining how her family's financial ruin had led to her husband's drinking problem and the eventual breakup of their marriage. Richard's defense attorney tried to paint Maya as a disgruntled daughter who was seeking revenge against a father who had disappointed her, but the evidence was overwhelming. Financial experts testified that Richard's schemes had been sophisticated and deliberate, designed specifically to exploit vulnerable populations. FBI agents testified about the extensive money laundering operation that had allowed Richard to hide his profits across multiple states and offshore accounts. Even some of Richard's former business associates testified against him, revealing that he had bragged to them about his ability to manipulate desperate people into making bad financial decisions. The most powerful moment of the trial came when several of Richard's victims testified about how his crimes had affected their lives. Margaret Henderson, now 84, took the stand with the help of a walker and described how losing her home had destroyed her faith in humanity and led to a depression that lasted 3 years. James Morrison, a Vietnam veteran, testified that Richard's predatory loan had cost him the small business he had built with his military benefits, forcing him to declare bankruptcy and move in with his adult children. Patricia Williams, a nurse who had invested her entire retirement savings in one of Richard's fake development projects, testified that she now had to work double shifts at age 68 because she could no longer afford to retire. When the jury returned after just 4 hours of deliberation, Maya held her mother's hand as the foreman read the verdict, guilty on all 23 counts, including wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. Judge Patricia Morrison sentenced Richard to 22 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay $47 million in restitution to his victims. As the bailiffs led her father away in handcuffs, Maya felt a complicated mix of relief, sadness, and vindication. She had done the right thing, but it had cost her the father she had loved and admired her entire life. The aftermath of the trial was both devastating and liberating for Maya and Eleanor. They lost the family home, the cars, and most of their possessions when federal agents liquidated Richard's assets to pay restitution to victims. Maya's job at Sinclair Holdings disappeared when the company was dissolved as part of the criminal proceedings. For several months, both women struggled with depression and anxiety as they tried to rebuild their lives and their identities outside of the privileged world Richard's crimes had provided for them. But gradually, they began to find a new sense of purpose and meaning that had been missing from their previous lives. Maya used her business education and experience to start a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping victims of financial fraud navigate the complex process of recovery. She worked with law enforcement agencies to identify assets that could be returned to victims, helped families understand their legal options, and provided financial counseling to people who had lost their life savings to various scams. The work was emotionally demanding and financially challenging. Maya's salary was less than a quarter of what she had earned working for her father, but she found that helping real people solve real problems was infinitely more satisfying than the hollow success she had known before. Eleanor surprised everyone, including herself, by discovering a talent for advocacy and public speaking. She began working with senior citizen groups to educate elderly people about financial fraud and how to protect themselves from predatory schemes. Her presentations were particularly effective because she could speak from experience about how sophisticated and convincing financial criminals could be, and how even intelligent, educated people could become victims. Eleanor also became an advocate for stronger penalties for white-collar criminals, arguing that the current system didn't adequately deter people like her ex-husband from preying on vulnerable populations. 3 years after Richard's conviction, Maya received a letter that changed her perspective on everything that had happened. It was from Margaret Henderson, the elderly woman whose photograph had first broken Maya's heart when she discovered her father's crimes. Margaret wrote that she had received a settlement check from the government's Victim Restitution Fund that allowed her to put a down payment on a small apartment. More importantly, she wrote, Maya's decision to expose her father's crimes had restored Margaret's faith in humanity by proving that there were still people willing to sacrifice their own comfort to do what was right for others. The letter made Maya realize that her decision to turn in her father hadn't just been about justice or legal obligations, it had been about choosing the kind of person she wanted to be. She could have stayed silent, continued living off stolen money, and maintained the comfortable lie that her father was a successful businessman who had simply been more aggressive than most. Instead, she had chosen to acknowledge the truth about where her privilege had come from and to take responsibility for making sure her father's victims received whatever justice and restitution was possible. Today, Maya works as the director of the Financial Fraud Recovery Center, a nonprofit that has helped recover over $15 million for victims of various investment and real estate scams. Eleanor serves on the board of directors and travels around the country speaking to community groups about financial fraud prevention. They live in a modest apartment in Hartford, drive used cars, and shop at discount stores, a lifestyle that would have horrified them 5 years ago but which now feels honest and authentic in a way their previous life never did. Maya still visits her father in prison twice a year, not because she has forgiven him, but because she believes that maintaining some connection to him is important for her own emotional health. Richard has never expressed remorse for his crimes, and continues to insist that his victims were willing participants in risky investments who should have known better. But in their most recent conversation, he told Maya something that gave her hope that he might eventually understand the impact of his choices. I never thought about the people, he said. I only thought about the money. I wish I could go back and think about the people. As Maya walked down the courthouse steps on that rainy day 3 years ago, she couldn't have imagined how dramatically her life would change or how much she would grow as a person. Exposing her father's crimes had cost her everything she thought mattered: wealth, status, security, and the loving relationship she had treasured with the man who raised her. But it had given her something more valuable: the knowledge that when faced with an impossible choice between family loyalty and moral responsibility, she had found the courage to do what was right, even when it meant sacrificing everything she held dear. Maya learned that real success isn't measured by the size of your bank account or the luxury of your possessions, but by your willingness to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves, even when doing so requires enormous personal sacrifice.